Hello, welcome aboard the Struggle Bus. My name is Nolafis, and today we're going over what the GPS is and how to make it. In case you don't know, a GPS is basically a replay file that the player can watch to help them understand what the route is and how the author intended the map to be driven. They're typically located at the beginning of the map and are triggered by driving into them. Now, the GPS is optional, but if you're going for track of the day or trying to get a map into a competition, including a GPS can dramatically increase your chances of getting through, as it helps the approachability of your map and makes it that much friendlier. I should say though that some competitions actually tell builders to not include a GPS, so make sure to double check those map requirements, and I'm sorry console players, but this is a PC only mechanic. The tools required aren't available in the console editor, so you can either not worry about this or collab with someone on PC and have them put a GPS in for you. I know it sucks, but there's not much we can do. If you can put in a GPS though, it's not immediately obvious how it's done, so let's cover that first. I'm going to use one of my current work in progress maps as an example. It's a water snow car map, and I want to hear nothing but positive things about it in the comments. Thank you very much. In order to make a GPS, the first thing you're going to have to do is open the media tracker. It's the film icon with the mountains in it. Click on that and select Edit next to In-Game. The screen is a lot to take in, but it's not too bad. The box on the bottom left is where each of your triggers are. You'll notice one is already there, but it's empty and doesn't do anything. The box to the right contains what the selected trigger does. The large area at the bottom of the screen contains the timeline and is where we'll actually place all of the effects. You can look around normally as if you were in the regular editor, and I'm going to zoom into the beginning of the route and place where I want this trigger to take effect. To do this, select the trigger you want in the far left box, and then click the wrench icon with the gear. You'll notice a box appear where your cursor is at, and you can change the elevation with the scroll wheel. I want the players to drive backwards into the GPS, so I'm going to place the trigger block right behind the start. Once the player's car drives into the screen block, the media tracker will trigger. I'm also just going to go ahead and change the name of this trigger to keep better organized. GPS replay should be descriptive enough, but now we need a replay. To import one in, click the stopwatch icon at the bottom and a window will appear. Unless you have moved them, the replays you save in-game are in the folder My Replays. If you've saved quite a few, you might have to go through the pages until you find the one you want. Click on it and select Open, and the replay is now imported. It should pop up on the timeline, and you can see the name in the tracks box. This isn't enough though, as we want to make sure that the player's camera follows our ghost instead of their car. So press the green plus icon in the tracks box and select the player camera near the top left. By the way, now that we're working in the timeline, the controls are to hold right click and drag to zoom in and out, and hold the mouse wheel button and drag to move the timeline itself. We want the camera to follow the ghost for the entire time, so zoom out to see everything. Select the last key on the orange player camera rectangle to select it. The light blue boxes in the timeline are called keys. So click the end of the player camera line and hold shift as you click the end of the ghost line. Boom, the two are now the same length. One more step to make sure the camera will follow the ghost. Click anywhere on the player camera line and look at the top left. You'll see target with local player currently selected. Go ahead and hit the arrows on the side until you select the ghost, which should have the name of whoever drove the replay. In this case, I have 1-Nolafis. I'm going to scroll across the timeline here, and you can now see that the camera is following my ghost. If this is all you want to do, then that's it. However, I do like to add a couple more things. I'm going to go to the beginning of the timeline and click so the current time is set at zeros across the board, and add another track. So click the green plus icon. This time I'm adding a fading transition located near the top middle. I add this in and it turns the screen black. Now I want to turn your attention to the bottom right. I have the fading transition selected, and these two times here indicate where the current track starts and ends. So the fading transition currently starts at 0 seconds and ends at 3 seconds. This is too long for me, so I'm going to adjust the end time to be half a second. If we let this play, you can see the replay now fades into view, and in my opinion, this looks a lot better than it just appearing. And I'm going to go ahead and copy paste this to the end of the timeline as well. Before I do though, I notice the replay goes on for a bit too long. So instead of typing the length I want to the right, I click and drag the last key on the ghost to cut the ending to where I want. Once I'm happy with where the replay ends, I use the shift click trick to cut the player camera track as well. Now, I paste the fading transition I copied, click the middle of the track, and drag to place it where I want. But there's a bit of a problem. The transition starts at black and fades to be transparent. Great for the beginning, but now I want the opposite for the end. To fix this, I select the first key and drag the opacity bar on the left to nothing. Next, I select the last key in the transition track and drag that opacity bar to full. Now, I'm going to click the film icon with the play triangle in it to watch what's on the timeline. I'm going to fade to the end and we can see that it all looks good. That's going to be it for the replay itself, but there's one more thing I want to do. In order to get to the GPS, the player has to drive backwards. So now I'm going to create another trigger to let the player know where the GPS is located. Under triggers, near the bottom left, I'm going to click the green plus to add another trigger. And I'm going to name it GPS text to stay organized, and this will be the text to tell the player where the GPS is. To do this, I'm going to press the green plus under tracks and select text near the middle right. I'm going to zoom in on the timeline so I can see what I'm doing better, and click the wrench with the gears under triggers and place the block right where the car spawns. Next, I'm going to type a specific time into the timeline by clicking the green box with current time and changing it to 2 seconds. With that, I'm going to click on the text where the 2-second line is and press K. This will place a key where the current time is. I'll explain more in a moment what keys actually do, but now I'm going to select the text box in the upper left corner and type in what I want it to say. In this case, we'll go with AK GPS behind. Well, Oops, I forgot to add the behind, but I'll go back and add it later. The text is looking a bit small for my taste, so I'm going to each of the size boxes and changing it to 1.5. It's still a bit hard to see, so I'm going to add a $ plus an S at the beginning to add a drop shadow. Much better. To get the text where I want it to be, I have to make sure that a key is selected, and then I hold right click on the text itself and drag it to where I want it to be. I also like to put the time of the GPS so players know if it'll be worth their time. So I'm going to click on the text track itself and copy/paste to create an identical text object. I'll change the text to 47.230, drag it to where I want it to be, and it's time for the final part. Keys are very important, and it's where I see beginners mess up the most. The keys are basically points where the object is telling the editor that this track has to look like this at this point. Right now, only the first keys on each track are what we want them to be. So select the first key, copy, select the next key, and paste. This will copy all of the attributes and make sure the text stays where it's supposed to be. Do this for the rest of the keys, and you should be good to go. Except in this example, I want the text to fade out after a couple seconds so it's not in the way. So for the last key, I'll paste all of the data over and then turn the opacity to nothing. The editor now knows that the text has to disappear by the time it reaches that key on the timeline. So the last second will gradually fade the text out. And with that, the GPS is done. Make sure to save so progress isn't lost and test it out to make sure everything works. That's how I like to make my GPSs, but I would like to mention a few more things that I didn't get a chance to here. Now, I would like to go over some common practices. There's no official rulebook when it comes to a GPS, but there are some guidelines the community likes to follow. For instance, putting the GPS behind the car is the most common spot, but if you don't want to do that, then there are a few ways to signal to the player where to go. Putting a finish block right next to the start is a universal sign that this is where the GPS is at, as well as placing a sign or custom block. I would avoid using a sign as sometimes the site supporting the image can crash, causing the sign to not load, and now the players have to guess which sign leads to the GPS. It's not very likely to happen, but I've seen it before and it's not much work to avoid it. So, I do. You'll notice I put the time of the replay on the very first text display, and if you don't want to put the text right at the start, it's common to put the time at the beginning of the GPS instead. It helps players gauge how much the replay will help them, and it's a nice quality of life addition. Speaking of quality of life additions, if your map has anything special going on with it, it's nice to put little tips on the screen. In my water snow car map example, I went back and added text on the screen displaying what action key I used where. I'm normally a controller player, but I used keyboard to set the author time in GPS, as keyboard is at a disadvantage with the vehicle, so hopefully these added touches will help level the playing field, and maybe boost the score when I eventually send this map into map review. If you do end up not putting the GPS behind the player, make sure the entrance to it is visible from the start. A lot of players will look for a sign or text telling them where the GPS is at, and if they don't see it immediately, they'll assume it doesn't exist. So make sure there's something directly in their field of view. The last little tip I want to cover is that the example I made is pretty basic. There's a lot more you can do with the media tracker if you put in the work, so experiment, see what other media tracker tutorials are out there, and make something that you really like the look of. Before I wrap things up, I would like to go over some common mistakes, starting with moving text. Now, text sliding across the screen isn't a bad thing, but if I see text saying GPS behind start out in the corner and slowly move to the center of the screen, that means the author most likely forgot to copy and paste all of the key data. So if your text is sliding and you don't want it to, double check those keys. Another mistake happens when the author wants to make sure that the player sees the text telling the location of the GPS, so a flashy animation plays before revealing the text. It looks nice at first, but can quickly become annoying when you have to watch it over and over again as you hunt the map, constantly distracting you from being able to focus. So if you do want to put an animation in, make sure it's minimal and not too flashy. This next one used to be more common, but it still pops up every once in a while, and that's the standstill or no input GPS. This is a replay that instead of driving into, the player stands still at the start for a few seconds and then the replay takes over. Or in the case of no input, the card naturally rolls into the trigger. It's not the biggest deal, but it's kind of annoying to have to wait for the GPS when you could otherwise drive immediately into it. And if someone wants to cam 7 around to check your scenery out, instead of being able to do that right away, they now have to drive for a second and then do it. It's a quality of life thing, but these types of GPSs just add a few annoyances without adding much to the map, and I would stay away. Another little annoyance is placing the GPS too far away from the start. If the player has to drive more than 3 seconds to get to it, it's too far. Especially if you're going for Cup of the Day, every second matters in qualifying, so it's best to make everyone's life easier by placing the GPS right next to the start. The last mistake I want to cover is honestly kind of a cool one. If you've ever wondered why some replays have normal audio while others sound really quiet, it's not random. If the car is in water, falling, or turtled, the audio will be much quieter. Here's an example of a replay with the car not doing any of those things. And here's a replay with the player's car driving into a pool. Once again, not the biggest deal, but if someone is trying to figure out where exactly they're supposed to gear up, it creates a bit of an obstacle in finding that information. So having a small hole or barricade for the car to run into is much better than a fall. And that's everything you need to know about the GPS. It's a bit complicated at first, but once you've made one or two, the entire process can be done in less than 5 minutes. Just remember to keep things as simple and easy as possible for the player, and you can't go wrong. If you feel like I missed something and have further questions or want to share some tips of your own, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you're interested in more Trackmania mapping content, you're at the right place because that's pretty much all I do here. So if you want to see more, I'd appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed. I also stream on Twitch a few times a week, but specifically on Wednesday nights, I host viewer map review. So if you have a map you would like to see some feedback on, you can join my Discord and submit your map for the next session. Just make sure to read the rules first. And I think that's all of the self-advertising out of the way. The only thing left to do is to say thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch my video. I really do appreciate it. And if you'll excuse me, it's time to step off the struggle bus and create a feature-length film exclusively in the media tracker. Wait, the door won't open. I can't leave the struggle bus. Am I trapped here? Why won't the windows open? Oh no, someone save me. Why can't I leave?